Tears of the Kingdom is a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild. Cool, right? That's going to be the only non-controversial thing in this entire video. Today I'm going to be going over the timeline for Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. Contrary to popular belief, this is an entirely separate timeline from the three we know. But what are the major differences, and how do I know this? How can I say this definitively? That, my friend, is what we're going to be answering today. There are three major differences, and they all lead into each other. And we're going to be going over the first. The Zonai or Twilight. Believe it or not, what you read on that transition slide isn't even the biggest claim in this video, but let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. In Twilight Princess, we learn of the Twilight, a tribe of people put into the Twilight Realm due to conflict over the Triforce. Now, the meme about them is that they love masks. Not only is it heavily implied they create a Majora's Mask, but another thing is that the Twilight are capable of creating Sacred Light, as well as the Few Shadows, which is another mask. But to talk about the Sacred Light, during the Twilight Realm dungeon in Twilight Princess, a lot of the puzzles involve carrying around these little balls of Sacred Light, which even cure the corrupted Twilight around the area. Just like with Link in Tears of the Kingdom, they're capable of using Sacred Light to get rid of the gloom. And that isn't the only connection between the Zonai and the Twilight. And the Zonai also share a love of masks with them, from the sages all wearing powerful masks before the Imprisoning War, to all of the Zonai headpieces Link can wear in the game being masks. So they can produce both Sacred Light, and they both have a huge affinity for masks. Now, I wouldn't be entirely convinced either at this point, however there's one more huge connection to the Twilight. Now, gloom is this red goop that kinda sucks. It's deadly, it infects monsters, it's fought using Sacred Light, and it corrupts the land. This is exactly the same behavior as in the Twilight goop in Twilight Princess. So if both games goop are effectively the same, and both games feature a new species that are effectively the same, there's a lot of connections there. That seems kind of intentional, no? And assuming that's the case, then we would be in a timeline where the Zonai never got sealed inside the Twilight Realm, and evolve into the Twilight. But if the Zonai are Twilight, then Demise is also a Twilight. Where is he in all this? Now here's where we get very controversial. To start off with, let's explain why Demise is a Zonai and how that connects to the Twilight. Demise is a being described by Fee as an eternal being that has conquered time. Considering Zonai are eternal beings that also have time powers, it makes a lot of sense. He's just a really powerful Zonai, and I think that also explains his motivation in Skyward Sword. See, for Demise, attacking the goddesses was personal, and since the Zonai are the descendants of the goddesses, now we can rationalize this as a family dispute, very reminiscent of Greek mythology. His goal in all this was to take the power of the Triforce to kill the gods. I believe that this makes perfect sense and synergizes well with the theory that the Zonai are Twilight, because when looking at the timeline immediately after the events of Skyward Sword, the Twilight are banished, despite not being mentioned or being a problem in Skyward Sword. Now this is a little leap of logic here, but what if the goddesses punished all Zonai for the actions of Demise, sealing them away in the Twilight Realm? This is supported by Twilight Princess. The origin story of the Twilight tells a tale about attempting to grab the Triforce to beat the gods. I believe that this is the true story of Demise. And because the Zonai never got sealed in Tears of the Kingdom, this means Skyward Sword never happened. Another point to this theory is that Fia is capable of time travel in Tears of the Kingdom. Now, that would create so many plot holes for Skyward Sword. Like, why not send Link back in time to stop Demise? Why did we need to use Impa's time machine? However, this being a new timeline, this isn't the same Fee either, so her being different and having different abilities makes sense here. But I have one more connection. You see, we know that Skyward Sword Link never existed either. First King of Hyrule, was alive well before it was founded, watching over the Sky Islands. Rauru! I hate this clown so much. #1 Rauru hater here, and he hasn't even heard what the fuck a Link is. And he doesn't recognize Zelda as a reincarnation either, she's just a descendant. Links and Zeldas are still reincarnated through the goddess wishes in this timeline. However, they aren't well-known saviors. The Skyward Sword Link was not the savior that allowed the founding of Hyrule. Rauru would have known about him because Demise never attacked and the events of Skyward Sword didn't happen. That's how this all fits together to tell a really compelling story. And that's why there are so many items from other games, because this calls the events of every game into question. What happened around the time period of Twilight Princess? If the Twilight are Zonai, then they weren't the ones that got banished there. Who did get banished there? It might be some weird timeline with the Gerudo. We have no idea, there's just conjecture. The events are just different, but there was a guy known as the Hero of Twilight. That's why you can have that armor set, and I believe that's the same case with every item armor set that's a reference. These time periods still happen, time has passed, but they were different adventures and we don't know the events of any of them. They're like old myths. And Rauru would be the one person above all else that should know who Link is. The one person. But then this makes so much sense, given that we've seen a cutscene from Ocarina of Time from Ganon's perspective. But there are multiple key differences here. Most notably, Zelda from Tears of the Kingdom is there, and young Zelda and Link looking through the window aren't. In fact, another big difference is that Ganon isn't even after the Triforce, he's after the Zonai Secret Stones. Why wouldn't he be after the Triforce here? This is supposed to take place during the time period of Ocarina of Time, and he doesn't seem to give a shit about it. I think that's because the Triforce would still be locked in the statue of Hylia on the Sky Islands, and it's not being kept by the Kingdom of Hyrule. The Sky Islands never fell, none of that ever happened, because Demise never attacked. And the Triforce is only really known through myths, legends, and as a symbol for the royal family. It only shows itself to people it deems worthy of each of its parts, and that's why we see it on the hands of Link and Zelda respectively in Breath of the Wild. But other than that, it just stays mostly lost to legend. Now, one major problem most people are going to have with this video is that there's a common belief that the timeline just looped. Hyrule fell, the world reset, etc. And similar to a Dark Souls theme. However, this belief is just flat out deconfirmed in game, with Zelda herself saying that she arrived in the ancient past, the very beginning, meaning that she is actually at the first founding of Hyrule, with all the timeline changes remaining, which means the fork had to happen before then in the timeline. And this is why Ganon's perspective during the events of Ocarina of Time has all these changes, and that's how we know for a fact it takes place during that time. It's just a different time, a fork from 100 years prior changing everything. Another big issue people will have with this video is the mural from Breath of the Wild. When you first look at it, it appears to show an ancient battle, and Impa even says as much. And how can that be true if this is the first time Link has saved the world? Well, if you get all the shrine rewards in Tears of the Kingdom, you get your answer. You find out the mural was actually depicting the final boss fight in Tears of the Kingdom, and that Zelda probably had it made to warn Link about the upcoming battle. So, to put it all in words, Link and Zelda still reincarnate, but they live much different lives. Skyward Sword never happened, Demise never attacked, and the Zonai has a prosperous history compared to the original timeline's counterpart. The timeline is now forked with Demise, and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are now on their own unique timeline. And honestly, I'd love to see the events of some of the games through this new scope. Honestly, that explains why it seems like every timeline gets small representation. This is a brand new world. It's not a convergence, it's not a separate timeline. It's a fork on whether or not Demise attacked. And you know what? Just like OOT, In Skyward Sword, you also visit 2 different timelines because of the time machine at the end. It always made sense that there would be a fork here, and, well, we finally got it. Maybe we should have considered Breath of the Wild as the fork a lot sooner. Subscribe because I said to, and this is Reborn Pyro, signing out. Future Reborn here. More specifically, it's the timeline that Link goes back in time to kill Demise in. And this is the timeline where Demise is killed by Link, obviously, the statue never fell on him, and the gods did not curse Demise into being the imprisoned. This is the one that a Link immediately returns to his own timeline from after the events of Skyward Sword, carrying the curse and all.